And welcome to the Emerging Civil War podcast. I'm Chris Mackowski, and we're doing a little cross podcast promotion today because you might feel like you are with the Civil War Breakfast Club because, in fact, you are. So, Darin, Mare, welcome. Welcome to be
Thank you
with us
very
today.
much for having us on here. This is a great honor for us to be talking with you
Sounds-
tonight.
It's great to be on. Great to be nerding out with like-minded folks. So it's great. Thanks for having us on. We appreciate it.
Oh, delete it. Now, I'm going to, since I've invited you into my house, though, I feel like I have to be a good host and ask, Mare, what are you drinking tonight?
I'm being very boring and drinking water tonight.
Yeah, same with us. Same with us. So we're playing it good on a Monday night here.
Very good. So, and I think that that sort of captures the spirit of the way you guys approach your podcast is, like we're just hanging out, having a drink and talking history. Darin, tell me a little bit about, just your general approach to this.
Well, I mean, I think the best Civil War conversations I've ever had have been bumping into people in restaurants or bars or on the street, and so it's a way to sit down and trade stories and chew the fat and talk about these things, and I think it's a good way to get personal with people and just kind of I remember sitting at places like Sweeney's over in Gettysburg or other places down in Fredericksburg and just having conversations with people, these salt of the earth folks who are locals, and just getting their spin on it, whether it's right historically, wrong historically. It's what's great about history. It's all interpretive. It's how they see it. And so you can have great conversations with that. And so, our podcast is basically we have subjects we talk about, but for the most part, we research independently. We don't compare notes. We don't rehearse it. We just open it up when we talk because we want to get that banter, that barstool banter, to talk about opinion and keep it real because you could read your ORs and your battle reports all day, but when you're talking natural, that's the way to be it. And we like to talk about the local stuff. Corps is made of divisions, divisions of brigades, brigades of regiments, regiments of companies. But companies are made of husbands and brothers and sons. So we like to talk about the ground up and just kind of relate to people because people can't really relate to Robert E. Lee or George Meade, but everyone's got a relative who fought in the war for the most part. So you can resonate at that lower grassroots level. And what's great about the Civil War in the study is that it's so personal for people in a lot of different ways, no matter where you fought, no matter what side you happen to be on. And you've all got stories, and these stories need to be told. And you can keep people alive by keeping their memories alive and telling their stories. And that's kind of the genesis of the entire thing and my own personal belief with this type of study.
So, Mary, I want to ask you that same question, but I got to ask you first, though. If we can't associate with Robert E. Lee, we can't relate to George Meade, but you've got a big crush on Oliver Otis Edward, right?
I do enjoy studying him quite a bit, and I kind of found my way to him in the roundabout way of Sherman because I kept reading about the March to the Sea, and Howard's name obviously kept coming up, and at Gettysburg too. And I wanted to look more into well, why does this guy have such a bad reputation? Because I used to be one of the Howard people. And then I started reading more and seeing wow, this guy is after Gettysburg, he doesn't really get talked about, yet here he goes out to the Western Theater. And he kind of, that's where he shines. That's where he finds his footing out there. And I think it's because he maybe got away from the type of politics that you see in the Army of the Potomac. There are still politics out in the Western Theater, obviously, but Sherman, I think, saw something in him, and to see how he rose out there and, grew, and just leading Army of the Tennessee at the Battle of Ezra Church, 2 days after he takes command and he wins that battle. And he's just somebody that, I don't know, in a way I would just to relate to him to being kind of aloof and not always fitting in. But I think he's an interesting guy to study. And no, he is not the best general in the field. He's very good, though. I think he's very underrated. But it's just a very human story. And I enjoy reading his letters that he wrote to his wife. He's actually got quite the sense of humor if you read his letters. And the letters he writes to his children as well. He missed them a lot, especially near the end of the war. You can see it was starting to wear on him as it was on everybody. But yeah, I got into him a few years ago, and I still enjoy studying the others too, but he's just an interesting individual worth a second look.
His extensive correspondence, and it's pretty neat to read him and see that human side of him because he is easily caricatured. His statue at Gettysburg is so stern and rigid and non-friendly. He's a pretty interesting guy, though.
Yeah, yeah, and he draws pictures to his kids in his letters. There's one where he draws a picture of a dog that they have in the camp. He draws a picture of his tent that he's in, and he even draws a picture of like himself at one point. Just as these kind of, they're crude drawings, but it's still, he's drawing them for his kids to show what is happening in the camp and who's there.
Yeah. So, well, if you'll take me up on the offer, we'll get you back to do a whole episode on Oliver Otis Howard,
Okay.
and you can sing his virtues for a whole
Yes.
Oh, good. Be careful what you wish for on that. Okay. All right.
time. He's kind of like the other man, isn't he?
Oh, God, you put the bat signal out on that one, Chris. You mentioned, and here we go. But that's okay. But I agree with her, though. I mean, I think what's great about studying this is everyone has got good and bad and ugly, no matter who you study. And people resonate towards different people. And Howard's a great story to tell. And there's a lot of great stories to be told. And me personally, I love the Abner Smalls, the Elijah Hunt Rhodes, those stories. But also, I like the Edward Crosses and the Charles Tildens, the people, the Jacob Schweitzers, the people who aren't A-level people, but they all tell a great story and all have an impactful point in whatever battle they fought in. And you can tell a lot about their brigades or their regiments from their point by knowing their personalities. Charles Tilden, a hard-fighting Mainer, up from Castile, Maine. And since I'm a New Englander, you know the personalities. Edward Cross, stern, anti-immigrant, didn't care about slavery, just wanted to fight for the Union. That's everybody I know in New Hampshire. Unfortunately, it is. So if when you study these, you can resonate with the current politics. You realize, for one, people got to remember this war wasn't that long ago. It really wasn't, and people are still people. And as you know, the scars of the war are still here today. And especially in society. And so the more you learn about the Civil War, the more you learn about yourself and about the people we live in today. And that's what makes it great. That's really what it does.
I was listening to your Irish Brigade episode today, and it was interesting how, as you talk about that anti-immigrant sentiment that so many of those Irish immigrants were facing, and you draw out those parallels with the way we trip over history today, and the echoes and the parallels to it. And you guys seem to have a neat talent for, I wouldn't say stumbling across that, but sort of like, oh, look what we just found, that kind of way to bring that forward.
Yeah, it's interesting telling those stories and like I've learned so much doing this podcast. My opinion has changed on people. And just it's finding those little stories to tell so people can relate to it on a human level as well.
Yeah, Darin had that wonderful answer to start off with, sort of the barstool history where we're talking about people and folks are folks and husbands and sons and fathers, which I just thought was a beautiful answer. Mary, how do you sort of approach the folks that you're talking about when you're kind of sitting on the bar stool?
I like to tell the human stories. I also, I don't know, I have this weird thing with finding out, if they had pets with them in camp or what their horses' names were, and finding out the stories of their horses to find out that, Sheridan's horse, Rienzi, also called Winchester, was almost like an extension of his personality. The horse could be very grumpy. It only liked Sheridan to ride, they like to be on him. And Jackson's horse, Little Sorrel, was a little aloof like he was. And it just, and Mead's horse, Old Baldy, kind of the same thing. They're like extensions of their personalities. But I approach it into seeing like, what kind of human story can I find to have these people relate? Like, because they're not just dots on a map. They're humans, and what's happening to them in battle, is like sometimes their performance is affected by what is happening in their personal lives. You have General William Sherman at Missionary Ridge, and he doesn't have the greatest day there. If you go back and look at what the previous months have been like for him with losing his son, who he said was his favorite son, that's obviously affecting him there. And so things like that. And I think sometimes that gets lost when we study this and only look at kind of like, well, what's the strategy behind what they're doing in this battle? And you have to kind of think outside of that and go to the human stories to make, well, maybe they had a bad day because this was affecting them in their lives, just like we have bad days because of something personally can be affecting us.
Yeah. I can't even imagine what it would be like to try to keep an army together while you're trying to keep yourself together because you got news about the loss of your son. Like that's just got to be terrible.
Yeah.
So now, as I checked the stats today, last I saw, it was like you guys had 283,000 downloads for your 130 some episodes, 132, 133, is that the one?
Yep.
So I'm
Sounds
going to
right.
assume most of my listeners know who you are. But for those who don't, Darin, let me start with you. Where do you come from? How'd you get where you're at?
Well, I grew up outside of Boston, a town called Waltham, Massachusetts, home of Nathaniel Banks, and someone I know who you know, the great Fred Smirlis, Chris.
That's right.
The two most famous people in our town. But so I grew up there in prime Rev War territory, and we got dragged to Plymouth Rock and Lexington and Concord for school trips. But I was always a Civil War guy because I liked the pictures. I was able to look and see Matthew Brady's pictures and Gardner's pictures and Tipton's pictures, because it just, again, I realized that it's such a human and personal war. They weren't people in powdered wigs and people that my social studies teacher talked about. I could look at the pictures and you could learn the personalities of the people's faces. And it gets in the blood. And as you know, once a Civil War bug gets you, it doesn't let you go, and it holds on to you forever and ever. And it's great. And so you begin to read more, and you begin to read books, and begin to go to battlefields. And then people like to start at, say, Gettysburg, and you kind of build concentric circles out, and you start to work your way out, and you find out the Western theater, and then you see how it all kind of comes together. And then you draw the element of today and realized how impactful it was to today, like we said a little while ago, to today. And it gets that thirst of knowledge, that intellectual curiosity to learn more and more and more. But that's how it got me. And when I lived in Massachusetts, I was the Civil War kook in town. Whenever there was a statue unveiling, I got the newspaper calling me to come out there and sit there and be there, because no one else probably cared. But I was the guy, going to cemeteries and looking up the soldiers and sailors database off the gravestones, and that was me growing up. And it's part of you, because the war is part of all of us. But especially if you get really into it, you realize how much it actually is.
And Mary, how about you? How'd you get into it?
Well, I'm originally from Ontario, Canada. So people always ask me, how do you get into the Civil War? Because of that. Well, my dad bought me, when I was 6 years old, he bought me the Time Life series of Civil War books, because that's what you buy a 6-year-old. And I picked up the book about the assassination one night of Abraham Lincoln. And again, like Darin, it was with the pictures, but it was this, the assassination drew me into it. But my grandmother, I spent a lot of time with her as a child. She had a huge hand in raising me, and she always encouraged my love of history. But she also liked songs like John Brown's Body and Dixie and Battle Cry of Freedom. So she had records that she would play, and they had those songs on there. So I grew up hearing the music as well. And she was also Canadian, but just that it got in my blood at an early age, and it stuck. So I had to be, for the most part, like, we don't learn it in school in Canada. It was self-taught. But my high school history trips were all to the United States. And the one I went on was to Gettysburg in Washington, D.C. So that was my second time going to the Gettysburg. The first time I went, I was 9 or 10 with my parents. But it just stayed with me, like, throughout my life.
So then you guys took this passion that you each developed for history, but decided to turn it into career paths, and now you're podcasting about it. But Darin, I know that you've spent some time working professionally in the field, and getting to scratch your itch that way. Tell me a little bit about it.
Well, it's great. I mean, certainly you do this, you get called on to certain speeches and talks and things like that. And what's great about it is it gives you the ability to either dust up on what you think you know, or kind of redo the whole thing all over again and kind of learn. So every chance you have to talk or present or anything, it's an opportunity to kind of reinforce your own learnings. And it's always learning. It's, when they say there's no superlatives in the Civil War, and I agree with that. There's no great, there's no awful, there's always in between, but no one knows everything. And history, what's great about this is there's always stuff coming out that changes the narrative, that throws a monkey wrench into it. So things you might have learned 30 years ago that you hold on like grim death, I'm never going to let this go. Now you've got to unlearn. And when some knucklehead like me or Mary comes along and says something you don't agree with, and you go, oh, I have to think now. That's what's great about it. We don't do this as any sort of we watched your live a week or so ago when you had Jim on and you had Ricci on and those guys, and that you brought up a good question about entertainment versus education, and that got me thinking for a little bit afterwards. And I think you look at it more of an education versus also educational awareness. Like, you don't sit there and say, well, let's sign on, Mary. We're gonna teach some people something today. And that's I've always thought it's kind of an arrogant type of thing. You tend to talk about subjects you think you know, and then hopefully people, whether they agree or they don't agree, it'll get them to look a little more into the subject, and maybe they'll learn more, maybe they won't. But that's how we see it. It's all about maybe lighting that fire, trying to create that interest in a certain subject field. That's what's great about it. And the more chance you have to present and talk and study, the more people you get a chance to talk to and from, you learn more yourself sometimes than the people maybe who are listening to you.
Yeah. Yeah, Mary, why podcasting of all venues and ways that you could engage the history this way? Why podcasting?
It was, well, Darin and I had met during the pandemic, and we wanted a way to record these conversations we were having. Because I was like, they were good conversations, they were fun. And I was learning a lot, like so much from him. And I said, why don't we start recording these? And so we decided to do it that way, to just, record the conversations we were having, and maybe, we'd get a few listeners. We never expected to have the number of downloads we had. We never expected this community to kind of come about around it. Like, we've had some people coming on to we started off doing Facebook Lives. Now they're YouTube live streams on weekends. When we get a chance to do that, we've had some people coming on there since we started in August of 2020, like the same faces, and we've become friends with people. And you learn through talking with each other. Like what Darin said at the beginning, like some of the best conversations I've had too have been sitting over at O'Rourke's outside, having a beverage, having a meal. And it's just that casual conversation that flows, and you come away from it like, wow, I never thought of something that way, or that was like a really, really great conversation. But I think podcasting is a great way to reach people, because not everybody likes to read a lot. Not everybody has the time to do that. And with a podcast, you can throw it on while you're walking. You can listen to it while you're driving to work. You can have it on the background while you're making dinner or something. And it's just, I think it's also a way too that isn't, like, I think some people might get intimidated if they have to go to they're going to a lecture or something. And this might be a way to get them to go to a lecture. Whereas it's just the more casual conversation that hopefully leads them to going to more events and attending the lectures that are available out there.
Yeah, getting back to what Darin had said about kindling people's passion and interest to go dig more.
Yeah.
Darin, answer that question for me. Why podcasting for you?
Well, I think it's just the way it's funny because, when we started doing this, she asked me to do it. I didn't want to do it initially, to be honest. Well, because she was doing a podcast, an Abraham Lincoln themed podcast. And I thought she was saying, why don't you just do one on your own? I'm like, I don't know, but she's like, no, we'll do it together. I'm like, okay, well, that sounds like fun, because we had such great conversations, just talking about, theories and beliefs and what about this and what if that. But then it just turned into fun. Like, when we do this, it's just she and I hanging out talking. And if people want to listen, well, that's cool, but it's still just us talking. We don't present it so people are, like I said, we're not doing it to try to educate per se. We're trying to have a conversation that hopefully people might want to be interested in listening to, and maybe learn more about that specific subject. But it's always fun to talk and to bring people in and talk about it. And it is a great vehicle because, to Mary's point, you can reach a lot of different people in different ways. We've had people say, hey, I just, we did an episode, on Spotsylvania. I know one that you're very familiar with Spotsylvania, Chris. And it's like, I'm at the Mule Shootout listening to your episode. It's so cool to be able to place where old club he was when he got bagged, right? And so you can kind of put the visual to the spoken word. And I know you do it all the time, and how good it feels when someone can say, hey, this is where I've always imagined in my head where Emery upped in charge, but now I see it. So now it all makes sense. And that's why I do it, and that's why we like to do it, because it's fun to tell the stories, because it's hard to imagine that talking about a war that killed 750,000 people and is a complete tragedy in American history, that so many people are interested in it can create such a positive community built around it of like-minded people. Because for most part, in people's normal lives, you can't sit there and talk to the guy in the cubicle about, hey, did you you hear about George Crook's Eighth Corps? Because the hell, but here it's all like-minded people. I've always felt that and I say this in the podcast, the Civil War community is the smartest community that's out there, because people are always willing to learn, and they're always willing to engage and jump on, and they're willing to travel. We were at the reenactment at Cedar Creek this weekend, and thousands of reenactors, thousands visitors, all coming out for a battle that most people have never heard of. People who don't know Robert E. Lee versus Sarah Lee, they don't know of Cedar Creek. But in the Shenandoah, thousands come out to celebrate this, and they take it so seriously and have so much fun at the same time. You realize what a tremendous uplifting community the Civil War world really, really is as you really get into that inner circle of it. And that's what's so passionate about, which makes it so great.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I love about, when we have our annual symposium, for instance, or going to roundtables, and you see the same people who've been coming back and they've become friends, as Mary mentioned earlier. And it's just this great sense of community, and you have great conversations as a result, because you feel like you can talk and open up and challenge and chat and provoke thought in ways that I don't think other communities get to do.
No, and the key is you got to keep it positive. And the thing about it, though, is the Civil War is the third rail in American history. It's why when I was in high school, we did a week maybe on the Civil War. We talked about Sumter, we talked about Gettysburg, we talked about Appomattox, and then we moved on to something else. There's a lot of people who still, it's a sensitive subject when you talk about slavery or John Brown or John Wilkes Booth, any of these people, these dark characters in American history. But again, the key with our podcast, and I think anybody who does this, is you have to be open-minded to both sides, to everything within reason, but you have to be able to foster a positive-minded community and not tolerate the people who are there just to create the negative and draw that schism in. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's the challenge. But in 4 years, we've been pretty successful at doing that, because I think we try to stay positive ourselves. We talk about both sides. We've been accused of being too north and too south, so they must be doing something right. But that's how you have to do it. There are two teams on the field. You have to talk about both, but you have to be respectful, and you have to be able to speak positively. And sometimes, people get challenged by that, but hey, that's history. You gotta talk about it.
Yeah. As soon as you said these dark figures in American history, all I could think of was John Brown and John Wilkes Booth with red lightsabers, because they're now on the dark side.
Yep.
Can you imagine?
That's got to be a meme somewhere.
I found a parole card today from the 11th Texas by a guy named Harry Potter, of all people. So maybe he should have gone to Slytherin, right? Who knows,
That's
right?
That's right.
But I mean, that's what's kind of neat about it, is you can look into that. But you can look at popular culture with these things and kind of have fun with it. But again, the deeper you dive, the more truth there is, and the more fun it is. The more you can find more common ground with the other side, whoever that is, than you think you are by talking to them.
Yeah, I think too, it's about creating some people I think might have been turned away from the community because they had a bad experience or they didn't have a good history teacher. We try and run a monthly roundtable where we have no topic. It's just on Zoom, and people can come on and we just talk about the Civil War. We did it last week. It's always a fun time. And it's just to kind of create that community, that safe space where people can come on and talk about whatever they want. And it's always a great conversation. We've gotten to know people really well that way, but too, to tell them whatever your opinion is, come on and share it. Tell your story. Tell us why, it is that way. Because some people say oh, I don't know if I can come on. I don't know that much. I'm just starting out, or I don't know as much as so. It's that doesn't matter. Come on and talk to us. You probably know more than you think
and because people are finding the Civil War all the time, it's a lot of people sort of wring their hands about how our audience is getting older and dying off, but young kids are finding the Civil War at the other end of that. And so you've got people who this is brand new to them, and so they're looking for those opportunities to engage and learn and chat and sort of test out their ideas.
Yep, I saw lots of young people at the reenactment this weekend. We just had friends of ours come visit last weekend, and they brought their 9-year-old son, and we took him out on the battlefield, and he had an awesome time. He wore a kepi, Darin bought him a kepi, and he was, he had a great time, and he was already asking when he could come back again. And that was so great to hear that, he might now have a love of history because he came to Gettysburg when he was 9 years old.
And then young people, I mean, some of the coolest things, you'll stand at the Virginia Monument at Gettysburg and you look out and you'll see a father and son walk in picket charge, and the father's pointing stuff, and you know what they're saying, but you can't hear them. But the kid's looking up and he's fascinated by it. And you know what? The kid's not going to remember Kemper, and he's not going to remember Garnett, but he's going to remember how he felt when his father told him the story. And that's the thing that gets into your blood. But yeah, we saw a lot of kids. We saw a person running a cannon yesterday at the artillery at Cedar Creek who was probably 12 or 13, yelling to bring up the I mean, you saw a lot of young people, so they are out there. You don't see them on the round tables. You don't see them in places like that, but you see them out and about in the battlefield. You see them at the reenactments. They're out there, and it's our job as people who are historians who study history to keep that interest alive for that next generation, stay with it. Because contrary to what Mary thinks, we're not going to be around forever, especially you keep sitting on those barstools of Patty O'Rourke's, But the thing about it, though, is it is fostering that next generation of people who are going to be able to come out here and appreciate all these places, no matter where it is going forward, long after the current old guard is gone and then we're gone. And that's what's great about it. It should always be here, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's one of the kind of the cool things about podcasting as a medium, particularly, is that it is this conversation that you get to have with each other, you get to have with your listeners, and then you leave that behind as a legacy as you create that archive of past episodes that people can then go back and find. And long after the three of us are gone, that work is still going to exist in the digital space for people to keep discovering and rediscovering and bringing to the battlefields with them.
Mm-hmm. And that's what's great about it. The digital footprint, fingerprint, like I said, is right there, and people are interested. I mean, people will comment on things we've said, and an episode, whatever you did 3 years ago. What do you mean? Well, I don't know. It was 3 years ago, but they'll say, well, you maybe think about this. I'm like, well, I guess that's a good thing then. I don't remember the exact details, but it is out there. Sometimes we'll forget that other people are listening. Some of the things we'll say, but it is fun to do, because it's great to when someone will bump into you and say, hey, I just listened to this episode on this, and this was great. And, my father and I went to Shiloh when I was 7 years old. You reminded me of walking through the Hornet's Nest with my dad. Things like that's the things that's really cool, and that's the reward for us. We don't take a nickel for this podcast. We never will. But it's those comments back that makes the whole thing worth it.
Yeah. So where did you guys come up with your name, the Civil War Breakfast Club?
Well, shockingly, it involved 7 beers one night, but we were trying to think of a fun name. And I don't know why, all of a sudden Civil War Breakfast Club just came up, and we were like,
well, we were talking, we were sitting at the, we were talking about episode ideas first. And we had the episode of who would be who in the Breakfast Club movie in the Civil War. Okay. And the episode we never did, by the way, but that was the idea we talked about. And then she's like, because it was her idea, she goes, well, what about Civil War Breakfast Club? And I was like, yeah, that works. I mean, people who most ages will remember the movie. And then we started doing our lives in the morning on the weekend. So the Breakfast Club sort of turned into the community, the group who joins it, to kind of make it all inclusive, and that was the unintended thing. Was the number of people who kind of come on these things. And so the Civil War Breakfast Club theoretically is turned into all the listeners. So it's one of those things, but I gotta give her credit for that. That was her idea. She put that together. So she gets the A for the day on that one.
Well, considering the array of beer choices you guys have for breakfast, apparently,
yes.
So it's
yes. Benjamin Franklin once said, Chris, you cannot drink all day if you don't start in the morning, right?
There's a reason he was so wise, you know?
Yes.
That's my Boston and me coming out right there. But that's the thing is that's where the name came from. And we decided the beer thing was because we wanted to have a bar type conversation. That's where we went to. And you can't have you can't be Norm, you can't be Cliffy without beer. So we had to bring that in. There's been times it's been kind of tough to muscle that down at 10 o'clock in the morning, but you know what, the things you do for history, Chris, right? The things we do, we have our crosses to bear, but we have a lot of fun with that. It's pretty cool.
I've never known a Bostonian to have to complain about drinking at 10 o'clock in the morning on a weekend.
No, 10 o'clock usually is noontime somewhere, but no, we definitely enjoy that. I mean, some of the bars in the city, they open up at 7 o'clock in the morning, and they, under the guise of the third shift people, need a place to go up to work, but that's not why. But it's a good idea, but it's pretty funny though.
So, but on a more serious note, though, like I've been a long advocate of the idea that the best history gets done over beer and cigars. That very same notion that you're just sitting around with your pals, you're talking it out, you're coming up with like, well, what about this and how about that, and and you find these rabbit holes you get into in conversation, which I think you guys do a nice job of capturing, because you do sort of start poking at each other. Well, what about this? Well, what about that? And talking ideas through.
Yeah, and we've done that like throughout the entire time we've been talking, and that's sometimes how we've planned episodes. Like there was one, I think, way back when we first started. I remember we were going to do an episode. I think it was about Antietam, something to do with that. And I remember Darin messaging me and saying, like, we have to talk about McClellan and Lincoln and after Antietam, because he had done some research on it and he had found, stuff that he wanted to talk about. So I looked at, similar sources. And we went down this rabbit hole about McClellan, and that the McClellan episodes have actually been some of our more, I guess you could say, controversial ones, because like people have strong opinions on either side about McClellan. But like, that's just, some of the rabbit holes we've gone down, or we've looked at, certain people that don't get a look at in history as much, like Lytle from, who was killed at Chickamauga. His story was very interesting. William Haynes Lytle. We also did an episode on Hiram Granberry, also Western theater. He was a Confederate commander, but looking at his story and the story of his wife as well, because she was with him for part of the war until she unfortunately passed away from ovarian cancer. So it's finding these little rabbit holes, and often that's where you find the human interest stories too, that are going to hopefully pull somebody into the story to want to learn more.
So how do you guys prepare for an episode? From generating your ideas right down through now it's time to sit down and start talking about this. Walk us through the process.
We'll just sit down and say, what do you want to talk about? We'll usually just sit around. We'll pick it. Sometimes it's been busy this last 3 or 4 weeks with some other stuff going on, but for the most part, we usually try to get some ideas. We'll kick some stuff around and just put something on a calendar. Let's try to do this next week. We'll talk about the burning, the shit in the valley, which is the most recent one we just did. And then we'll just do independent research on it. And we don't do notes together. We don't compare notes. And then we just record and we just talk. What I have, what she has, and a lot of it's crossover. But if you want to have a natural conversation and you want to have, you can't sit down and say, run a rehearsal or script this, script that. We just do it and we just talk. And sometimes, we'll step over each other. Sometimes one of us will jump way ahead. We got to bring it all back.
Usually me.
Usually you. But what we'll do is, and that's how we do it, because a lot of times, and this is just by happenstance, she'll always find things I don't have and vice versa. We've got an ungodly amount of books we have, over about all these different subjects. And there's a lot of online sources. So we've seen watch one of your lectures to prepare for one of them back in the day. Because it's hard
up for entertainment, let me tell
you. But Mary, come in, Chris is on, but we'll look at all different resources, and then we'll come down and we'll outline style notes, and we'll just talk about it, and we'll just rip through. And in this way, we'll kind of be able to talk about the subject matter in an open forum. And by the time we'll start the episode, by the time we get towards the end, you were already thinking about some of the fill in the gap stuff so it changes. So, I mean, I know, and a lot of people like to write things out, they like to do it that way. But I mean, at that point, it just becomes somewhat plastic if you're doing that. And it's more, I like to know what she's studying, but I don't like to know until we're doing it live, because this way I've got to, it has to make me think. And then she always brings in something that I don't have, which always seems to tie together what I do have. And that's what makes it really cool,
Yeah.
is because and the more you study this, you realize how many different opinions people are based on the sources they read. And you could tell who's reading Sears and who's reading Coddington just by talking to them.
Mhm.
But I love the fact that you can kind of go through this, and by the time we have an episode done, it's an organized bar conversation.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's, using sources, be they books or primary sources, if they're easily accessible. But I often start off by making kind of a timeline. If we're talking about a battle, hit okay, what are the main points? And then from there, I go and fill everything in. But I always learn something from Darin during the podcast. And we're both always looking for kind of that human interest, that human element. Sometimes I will ask him something, I'll need clarification because I'm not very good with the military, figuring out some of the military terminology, and I'm not able to visualize that easily. So he explains it to me in a way that I understand, so I can understand whatever we're studying, especially if it's a battle. But it's just that we each decide what to do, go off and do our preparation, talk about it maybe for 10 minutes beforehand, and then hit record.
Yeah. Now, based on kind of what you're telling me here, as you're doing your research, how do you guys evaluate the credibility of your sources? And that's something that as a podcasting community, we all kind of have to wrestle with, because anybody can go and create a podcast in their basement, and there's a lot of noise out in the environment, and there are conspiracy theorists out there. And so, how do you make sure that what you're presenting is really kind of accurate and factual, and the historically sound information?
Well, I
Well,
think,
so
oh yeah, go
okay,
ahead.
okay.
I was
I was gonna,
so, oh, I'll go first, and then you can go. So I think just looking at what sources are they using? If you have Trudeau, what has he consulted? And then go from there. And if you can find those sources, look at that. What are their credentials? Just things like that. And the primary sources, what biases do they have in what they're saying about somebody? McClellan is a prime example of that. Darin and I were just talking about that on the weekend with some friends of ours, the Nathan Kimball letter, right, Darin? That was about
yeah,
World
I
War
mean,
I.
exactly. I mean, George Carlin once said, "Don't just read, question what you read." And question everything. And that's what you should be doing growing up. And you can read, she's talking about Lost Order 191 with the Kimball letter about the whole that leads to McClellan sitting for all the hours. It was debunked almost in real time, but you still see it. So you're getting an idea. Okay, I can read Sears and I can get this opinion. I can go see Tom Clemens speak and I can get this opinion, or Matt Border speak, just about the specific 191 thing, and get different views. And if you read a lot and you understand that there are different views, the truth always lies somewhere in the middle. I mean, no one's 100% right, like we said before. And you can go up there and you could be 100% confident in all your sources, and you're always one letter away from oblivion to blow your entire thing out, right? And you live in fear of it, admittedly. But if they're out there, so you always can't say to the fact that what's great about history, it's not math or science. X plus Y doesn't always equal Z. There's a gray area. And what's great about history is interpretive. How the three of us all read a subject, the same exact subject, we could interpret three different ways. Doesn't mean we're right or wrong. It's how we interpret it. So as long as you have an open mind as a historian, that what you're saying could be challenged and you may be wrong by someone else's interpretation, it kind of takes the pressure off a little bit. You go by what you have, the best sources you have. And sometimes you'll read things that doesn't jive with what you've read before. And you've got to make that decision as a historian, what horse to put your number on.
Mhm.
But that's why we do history, because no one knows at the end of the day. No, none of us are Confederates or Union soldiers. We go by what someone else is telling us, and you hope it's right. But as stuff goes on, you find out that the worm changes, and you have to kind of always keep your head in a swivel, and more importantly, keep that open mind. Because if you don't, you become a gatekeeper and you decide to be one of these people who just, this is the way it is because I was taught this way. That's where you get yourself in trouble, by holding on to that position like grim death and never letting it go in the face of pure logic. right? But that's what's great about history, and that's why I never did well in math. You know, they didn't take my interpretation too well in high school math.
Well, I
You were
think
doing the new math. You were a man ahead of your time.
I was doing Darin math, and that was the problem.
Well, I think too, when you have like the memoirs of Ulysses, generally Ulysses S. Grant, which one of our favorites. But you have to remember it's a memoir and he's going to have biases. And what is he saying about somebody like Rosecrans or Joseph Hooker, and who is kind of saying something different? And that's, you have to look at what biases is Grant having in that moment, or why is he saying that about someone, and is there someone else that has kind of the differing opinion? And we always say the truth is somewhere in the middle with that. You have something like the Battle of Lookout Mountain, which Grant says is pure romance. Well, General Joseph Hooker is going to tell you something completely different about that. And that's one thing that's fascinating about studying history, but that's also why, I'm a librarian, and I have done stuff with like information literacy and evaluating sources. You always tell people, look for the biases, but also don't just pick up one book on a subject. Pick up a few. If you're going to read about Gettysburg, don't just read Sears, read Trudeau as well, read Fawns, and just from there, you'll come up with the story. But you don't want to be pigeonholed into one person's kind of the way they think about a subject and the way they're looking at the sources and interpreting them.
That's why I always find conversation so helpful, because you read all these different things, and now I got some ideas in my head. I just want to talk this through with somebody and bounce this off folks. And the flavor of your podcast very much comes across as like, hey, here's what I read. Let's bounce this off each other,
Yeah.
which replicates that barstool sort of conversation.
Yeah. I mean, we're all always swimming upstream with this, because you can talk about Rosecrans and you could talk about Tullahoma and Murfreesboro, but at the end of the day, you're gonna bump heads with the people who like Grant. You're gonna talk the cracker line, who developed it, and so you have to be able to understand where people's own personal biases are from, and accept them as what they are. That's what they think. But you talk about it, and you hope that maybe someone will say, maybe Rosecrans was a little more influential in that army than maybe I originally came around to thinking. Maybe Sheridan's March to the Sea was not as bad as Sheridan's March to the Valley. When you look at
Sherman's March to the Sea.
Sherman's March to the Sea versus Sheridan's March to the Valley, exactly.
Yeah.
I always get those two confused. Those names are so close. But that's what the thing is. You have to look at the historical memory, which every historian fights, because these guys, there are sacred cows, there are devils, and there's somewhere in between. And you have to be able to take some people off their thrones and lift some people up. And you're always going to get the people, well, I don't want to hear about that. And that's why we do history, because that's what the gray area, that's what the good stuff is.
Yeah. So is there something either of you have relearned over the course of your podcasting career, where once upon a time you thought something, but over time you have reconsidered your opinion about something?
Oh, absolutely. I know for me, it was McClellan, admittedly. I mean, he was somebody who, like everybody else, you grow up and you're all you know about McClellan is the slows and going against Lincoln, and then as you really get into it and you realize, something, this guy built the foundation of the army. He was taking volunteers right off the farms and putting them into battles, and realized these guys weren't ready yet. So there needs to be a spring training here, is what he realized. And I've always said, you could take me, you could take anyone, you drop them into that spot, they're going to probably struggle too. A lot of the future Army of the Potomac that came later was built on the foundation Mac did. And people don't like to hear that sometimes. Doesn't mean we're a McClellan fanboy or anything, because I realize he had many flaws, but you have to give credit where credit's due. And I think as you learn, as I study more about him, I realize that there's more to this story than I think a lot of people talk about, because you read certain books who are very anti-McClellan. Alex Ruscino wrote a book recently that was kind of throwing a little more light on him, which I think a lot of people need to read, because I think you can still dislike the guy, okay, knock yourself out, but at least have more of a 360 opinion about it, instead of just the pablum that a lot of people get. But that's the one I'm talking about. I mean, there's been a lot of them. But that's the one that first pops in my mind, no question.
Sure, Mare, how about you?
For me, definitely McClellan. I mean, obviously Oliver Otis Howard is one, but also General Rosecrans as well. I used to think what he did at Chickamauga was like, I'm like, oh, that guy made a mistake, but then start looking at it more. And you start realizing like what's going on with him personally. You know, he's tired. He's been pretty much awake for 3 days, but at Stones River, he lost a good friend of his. And I think that was also weighing on his mind too, because the Rosecrans you have at Chickamauga is not the same Rosecrans you have back at Tullahoma or even at Stones River. But it's also, looking at the brilliance of the Tullahoma campaign, how good that was, and seeing what a great commander he was, and just his plan for the Cracker Line and how Grant was able to implement it, but that, Rosecrans was part of that as well. And he was someone that I came into it thinking, like, first time I went to Chickamauga, I didn't think, I'm like, well, who is this guy? Like, he doesn't seem like he's, that great of a general, but then studied him more. And he's one of my favorite, like, he's someone I really, really love studying now. He's so interesting.
Wow, I'm gonna give you the gold star for the day because you might be the first person I've met who's like Rosecrans. All right, so
Yeah.
good for you. Are you a
Rose.
contrarian? Mary, quite contrary. Is that what's
Yep.
going on?
But no, Rosecrans is a great study. She's right, though. I mean, a Tullahoma campaign right up there with the Vicksburg campaign, the greatest in Union history, if you really think about it.
Oh yeah.
Doesn't get a lot of press because people just don't study it. But I mean, the reality is, you could look at him and how Garash's killing, how it affected him personally, and you can sort of see you can see how his psychology changed a little bit when you really start to, you don't want to diagnose people with different things, but you can see how their personalities change, how Rufus Dawes' opinion changed, his journal. He's a completely different guy by the time he gets to the end. And it's all about personifying and looking at people's strengths and weaknesses. But Rosecrans is someone who definitely deserves a better look in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
I would agree to.
Yeah. Do you guys have a favorite episode or a favorite place you have broadcast from that really stands out for you?
Well, favorite place, we did an episode from Grant Hall at the courtroom of the Lincoln assassination a few months ago on the anniversary of the day before the hangings. We were able to get in there. That was with that was like a bucket list thing for me, just to go visit it. We visited not too long before that, but we actually get to do an episode in there. That because Lincoln, the assassination is kind of where I cut my teeth with a lot of the real history in high school, the assassination. So sitting in there, that was definitely my favorite place. Favorite episodes is tough to say because it's just they're all fun in different ways. We've had some of the lighter side than other ones. We did one on Civil War horses. That was a fun one a long time ago. We did Sex in the Civil War, which on Valentine's Day a few years ago. That was a fun one. But yeah, they're all different.
Happy VD.
Yes.
That might have been said probably by her.
For me, it was definitely at Grant Hall, just like Darin, like just that, because I got into the Civil War through the Lincoln assassination. So to be in that courtroom where so much history happened, very sad, tragic history, with all that was going on, but to see where, men like, Lew Wallace, who was part of that tribunal, where they sat. Favorite episode, actually, speaking of Lew Wallace, probably the episode we did on Lew Wallace, because he is another figure that we've had the opportunity to study a little bit more. And when you look at how he's treated after Shiloh and just the politics that are going into that, with how he gets sidelined for so long, and then he comes back, and a lot of these guys, they have some kind of redemption, and Mackowski is definitely his redemption. And I love visiting that battlefield for that reason. It's just such a fascinating battle, fascinating story. And like, I love doing the episode on Lew Wallace for that reason.
And Wallace keeps popping up. He just in history, he just keeps showing up in different places. He's just always there, But the episode of Grant Hall, we had Michael Kaufman got to do that with us. He was on the episode with who wrote the influential book, I think, of the Lincoln assassination, American Brutus, and he joined us for that. So it was that was great. But they're all fun.
You had a neat lineup of guests for that one too. I mean, you got to be in a cool place with cool guests.
Yeah, we had Adam Oler from the War College, and Michael Kaufman was with us. That was a great one. There was just so many fun people to talk and want to be on this and talk their passion. Because that's the thing, and you know, because you talk to people, you can sense the passion in their voices about it, whether they agree with you, don't agree with you. You know that they're really into it, and you're talking with a real captive audience, no matter what you're talking about. Because, like we said before, there's not a lot of places to go out and talk about this in a format that people can probably more resonate with, because it's not bookish, it's not lectury, and there's definitely a place for that. But at the same time, I think people like to be entertained and learn along the way. And like we said at the beginning of this, we don't feel like we're trying to teach anybody anything. We're just trying to do our thing and talk about our passion. And if someone picks something up along the way, well, that's cool. But I want them to, hopefully learn more about the subject and maybe get out there and do some tours and visit some battlefields along the way too.
Now, as we head into the home stretch here, you guys have recently relocated to Gettysburg. Now, of course, we're doing something that the digital space allows us to do from any place, really. But now that you're in Gettysburg, sort of the center of the Civil War industrial complex, is that going to open things up? Is that going to change things for you guys? Is that going to open a new chapter?
I think it's going to allow us like more opportunities to connect with people in the Civil War. Like we've been able to do this with you tonight, but we're so much closer to places. Like we were able to go do a Cedar Creek reenactment this past weekend, our first time ever doing a Civil War reenactment. Being part of that, like that was so much fun. And you're just so much closer to these places, and you're involved in this like amazing community, and being able to talk with people and make those connections. We'll keep doing the podcast the same way we do it. Keep doing our Facebook lives, our roundtables. We want to get back into our book clubs as well. We want to keep the podcast the same as it's always been. But we hope, living in this area, we have more opportunities to maybe record, not in our house, but maybe like live somewhere.
Well, and that's been coming up too. And we'll be participating in the 24 Hours on the Ridge at the seminary with the great Cody Aish, who I know you know. I saw your thing yelling down from the cupola. Very, but that was cool. But things like that are coming up. We were able to participate in the Cannonballs and Cocktails event at the museum in Harrisburg and do some trivia for their people. And so now that we're here, we have the ability to do things more face to face too. Whereas we have to come down from Mass for certain things. But now if someone says, "Hey, can you guys help?" Sure, absolutely. We'll do anything just for the fun of it. But there's being obviously down here in Gettysburg, the Disney World of the Civil War, in a lot of different ways, where everything's kind of comes here. It definitely creates more opportunities to go out there and see stuff and do some different things. So, and that's what's great about it is you're immersed in it. Even though it's in the weekdays, there's not as much Civil War that takes place as people think don't live here think there is. It's still a town, but you're able to do things to go out and do things we really hadn't done before. The reenactment you mentioned was great. We hooked on with the BMI group, Bureau of Military Information, and so it was great to deal with Bill Etzkorn and Tony Hoover and Ty DeWitt and those guys who kind of brought us into their camp, and we were in charge of going to talk to the military generals after the battles and getting their action reports and trying to find notes, draw maps for them. It was a lot of fun, and you're really living it in that mold. So that things like that those are the opportunities now that are coming out that we really embrace.
Now, if for some reason someone's not following along, how can they find the Civil War Breakfast Club?
We're on X is just Civil War Breakfast Club. We're on Instagram, same thing. We have our Civil War Breakfast podcast and forum page on Facebook. We're also on Threads. Anywhere we have a YouTube channel as well, and then anywhere you get podcasts.
Spotify, Apple Tunes, those are the only two I know, but I know there's more other ones. So, but no, it's great, and people like it. They enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. It's great to talk to people like you tonight, which is a great honor to do this. It's a lot of fun, and just seeing people out in the battlefield say, "Hey, I heard this episode, and like this, we didn't like that," whatever they would have happened to say. But they're listening, they pay attention, and it's great to. The more people the better person you'll be. That's a life lesson for anybody. But just being able to do this and talk about your passion with other like-minded people and try to bring it into some sort of format, which could be enjoyment for people. I have a lot of fun with it. We'll be doing a Halloween episode next week. I know people don't like to talk about ghosts and Civil War sometimes, but you know what? Everyone loves a good campfire story. So we tell some stories, and some history into it as well around the holidays. So we try to be a little bit for everybody, and just kind of make it entertaining.
Mm.
Wow, fantastic. Well, the privilege is mine. You say a great honor, but really the privilege is mine to be able to talk with you
Oh,
guys.
it's
You've
too kind.
done a lot to bring a lot of cool stuff to the field, and that sense of community you've created is really just kind of a treat to see. So thank you for the work that you guys continue to do.
Well, appreciate it.
And
Likewise.
thank you for all you do and for having us on here
Oh.
tonight. This is awesome.
My privilege, my privilege. So Darin, Mary, thank you so much. Really, I've had a great time hanging out. So
Thank
we'll have
you.
to do it in
No.
person on a real bar stool
Yes.
with real beer sometime.
Yes,
Oh,
definitely.
just you know how to reach out to us. Shoot us a message. Anytime we'll do that. We'll be happy to imbibe and talk history. That's what makes it great.
Thanks a lot. I'm
Thank
Chris
you.
Mackowski for the Emerging Civil War podcast. On behalf of my guests, the Civil War Breakfast Club, thanks for being with us. We'll see you online and on the battlefield.
So, peace out.